What's up VideoFort Nation, this is VideoFort Ruan with another awesome VideoFort tutorial. So welcome to the first mini project in this series. So in this video we're going to be looking at creating a bowling alley with some bowling pins, a bowling ball, and then also applying some physics simulation to our scene. First of all, we're going to set up our renderer. So we're going to go to rendering, render setup, scroll all the way down to assign renderer and set that to V-Ray. And then scroll up again and set our output size to HD TV. So make sure it's 1920 by 1080, and then we can close that down. Another important thing before we move on is this set save frame. So if you right click on perspective here, you can click on show save frames. So we're going to start with modeling of the bowling pins, and if you look in the project files you will find a bowling pin.png, which is just a picture that I've downloaded off Google of a bowling pin, and you can go ahead and either use this one or you can use your own one. If you just Google bowling pin you will find many that you can use. First of all, if you look at this image information, it will show that the dimensions are 263 pixels by 800 pixels. And that will be important when we create a plane so that we can model this off this picture. So back in 3dsmax, we're going to create a plane in your front view. So just drag out a plane like that. And we just need to make sure that our unit setup is set up correctly. So if you go to customize unit setup, let's make sure this is on millimeters. And then you can click on OK. So if we look at our picture again and we go to the dimensions, we'll see it's 263 by 800. If we look at the length and the width of this plane, we need to match that. So let's set the width to 263 and we set the length to 800. So then we know those dimensions are exactly the same as our image. And another thing, I want to move this plane down so it's at the center of our scene. And an easy way to do this, just press W on your keyboard so that we've got the move controls. And then here right at the bottom, just set the X to 0, Y to 0, and the Z to 0. And that will just snap to the center of your scene. Next, we're going to create a material. So we're going to press M on our keyboard, right click materials, V-Ray, and we're going to create a V-Ray material. And if we double click on this, we're going to click on the diffuse, but we're going to use the little box next to diffuse because we want to load a material onto that. And then we're going to select bitmap. So double click on bitmap. And then we're going to browse to our bowling pin, click on open. And one more thing that you want to do, let's rename our material and let's just call it bowling pin. And then we're going to assign this material to our plane. So you can just drag that little line to our plane, release. So if I render this quickly, you'll see the bowling pin on that plane, but we still cannot see that material in our viewport. So we're going to be modeling in the front view. So we want to enable this viewport so that it actually shows the material in here as well. So the way you do that is we click on wireframe here at the top and set that to realistic first of all. And then you can click on realistic again, go down to materials, and we're going to set this up with shaded materials with maps. Next, we're going to use a cylinder to start our modeling process. So in your perspective view, we're just going to draw out a cylinder, drag it up, and then we're just going to position it in the front view just to kind of match our image. And as you can see, we currently have a shadow there that's not really helpful at this moment, so we're going to switch that off. So in your front view, click on realistic and then go to lighting and shadows and then untick shadows just to disable that in the viewport. Okay, next we want to set the height and the width for the cylinder to match that plane. If we go to the plane properties, you'll see that it's 263 and 800. So let's start with the height for our cylinder. Let's set the height to 800. Then for the radius, which is a bit tricky, if we set the radius to 263, you'll see that it's way too big because the radius is from the center to the outside. So we need to halve that, which is 131 if I'm correct. And then it should be exactly the same width. So what you want to do is just zoom in here and try and align your cylinder to that plane in the front view. Next up, we're going to increase the height segments on our cylinder so that we have enough vertices to work with. So let's increase the height segments of our cylinder and maybe let's make it, I think 16 should be fine for this, as it's not a real high detailed model that we require. Okay, the last step before we start to model is we need to be able to see through this object because we can't see the image, so therefore we can't start to model. So the best way to do that is just right click on your object and then click on object properties and then enable see-through. Then click OK, and you will see that you can actually see through your cylinder and you can see the image in the background. Okay, then we're going to maximize our front view just to make it a bit easier to work. So you can right click on the plus here at the top, click on maximize viewport. So we need to convert our cylinder to an editable poly. So right click on our cylinder, go to convert to, and then click on convert to editable poly. And we're going to be using the vertex mode to edit our object. Okay, so let's start right at the top. With your select tool, we're going to drag a box over all these vertices right at the top, and then press R on your keyboard for scale, and then we're going to just press in the middle and hold and scale down, and we're going to try and scale it. We can actually zoom in here a little bit, so you can scale it down, and then we're going to move it down as well, so it's actually touching the top of our bowling pin. So press W on your keyboard for move, and then move that down so it's touching that top area, and if you just give it a few seconds, you'll be able to see the background image again. So let's zoom in here a little bit more, and let's press R on the keyboard again, and let's make that quite small so that we've got the top of our bowling pin. Okay, next we're going to select the next row of vertices. We're going to scale them down, and we're also going to move them up a little bit, somewhere around there, and scale them down so they're kind of touching the sides of our bowling pin. Okay, next we're going to go for the next row, and we're going to scale them down, and then we're going to move them up. So just press W on your keyboard, and let's scale them in again just to get a rough shape going. Okay, we're going to grab the next row, go to scale, scale that down, let's move it up maybe to around there, let's scale it up again somewhere like that, and let's go on to the next row, and we're going to do the same thing. Let's scale it down, and let's move it up a bit, let's scale it outwards slightly like that. Okay, let's go on to the next row, scale that down, and as you can see, you can actually model something quite quickly using this process. Okay, let's go into the next row, scale that down, and let's just maybe move that up a bit, scale that in. Okay, that's fine. Next row, scale that down, move it up a bit, scale that down, something like that. Let's move on to the next row, scale that down, that's fine. Scale that down. So you're just trying to kind of create a rough model of that image, and we're not really going to go very high detailed on this one. Just something basic should be perfect for this mini project. Okay, next row, scale it down, that should be fine. Next row, scale it down. Okay, we're almost there. Scale that down, scale that down, and that's the last row. So we're just going to move that up a bit, and let's scale that down. So let's go out of the front view. So right click the plus, restore viewport, and if we maximize our perspective view, so next I want to delete this plane, so we just need to go out of this editable poly mode. So just click on this first tab, the create tab, and then click on your plane, and then just hit delete on your keyboard. So there we go, we've got our first bowling pin created. And next up, I just want to move this up so it's actually sitting on the grid. So I'm going to go out of my perspective view, and I'm going to go into the front view. Let's just maximize that one. And then I'm going to move this object upwards so it sits nicely on that grid. Just zoom in there and just try and line it up perfectly, kind of just above that line. Okay, next we want to rename this object. So with this object selected, we're going to go to the modify tab, and right at the top where it says cylinder 1, let's type in bowling pin 1, and then press enter, and then your object will be named. Okay, next we're going to go out of front view, and we want to go into top view to clone and create the other bowling pins. So maximize our top view, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold in shift, and I'm going to drag upwards to create a clone, select copy, and it will automatically rename the next object bowling pin number 2, which is great. And I'm going to drag up one more time, and then that will be bowling pin number 3. Hit on OK. Okay, then I'm going to hold in shift again, move on the x-axis, select copy, that's bowling pin number 4, and we can move that down a little bit, so that will probably be in this area here. And we're going to hold in shift one more time, go down, that's bowling pin number 5, and we need one more, so hold in shift, drag this way, bowling pin number 6, and then just move that into place. Okay, let's go back into perspective view so we can see what we have. If I maximize that, and you can see we've got some basic bowling pins. Okay, next I want to create the floor section. So we're going to go back into perspective view. So I'm going to go back to create box, and I'm just going to drag a box out like that and just give it some thickness, just something like that should be perfect. Okay, let's go into our top view, and I'm just going to move this box into place, maybe something like that, and let's give it some dimensions. So for the width, I'm going to make it 10,000, and for the length, I'm going to make that 2,000. Okay, I see that our bowling pins are still set to see-through, so I'm just going to select all the bowling pins, so you can just highlight them like this, right click and go to object properties, and then just untick see-through. Click on OK, and there we go, you can see them a little bit better. Okay, next up we're going to create a bowling ball, so let's go to create and let's click on sphere, and I'm just going to draw out a sphere here in the front view, and let's just do something like that. Let's go to our properties and let's set the radius to 250, and then I'm just going to position it here in the front view so it's kind of in the center, maybe something like that. Then on the top view we can just pull that back so it's not inside the bowling pins, and let's put it at the front of our floor. Okay, let's rename our floor quickly. So with the floor selected, I'm just going to type in floor, and then we're going to do the same to the bowling ball. So click on the sphere and let's just call this ball. Okay, before we start our simulation, we need to create the animation for the ball. So with the ball selected and we're still on frame 0, I'm going to click on auto key and create a key. So press on the key to set a keyframe, and then I'm going to go to around frame 50, and let's just drag the ball right through the bowling pins to the other side, and it will automatically create a keyframe for that. So let's switch off auto key, and if you just scrub through your timeline, you'll see that we've got an animation on the ball. Okay, next up we need to set our dynamic objects. So first of all, let's select all these bowling pins. So you can do this either from the top view or from perspective, wherever you want to. So just highlight all of them. Make sure you're not selecting the floor or the ball. And here by the MassFX toolbar at the top, we're going to hold in on that sphere, and we're going to set these as dynamic rigid bodies. Okay, next we're going to select the floor, and we're going to set that to a static rigid body. And lastly, we're going to select the ball, and we're going to set the ball as a kinematic rigid body. Because we've added an animation to that, it will be a kinematic object. Okay, next let's dock our MassFX toolbar to the side. So click on this icon here to open it, then just drag it to the side to dock it. Then we just need to disable use ground collisions, because we actually want to use our ground that we created as our ground and not the grid. So just disable that, and let's maximize our perspective view. And let's just zoom out a little bit, something like that. So we click the start button here at the top, and let's see what happens. Okay, there we go. So let's just stop that and reset our scene. So let's try and move some of these bowling pins a little bit closer to each other. So I'm going to select this one, and I'm just going to drag it a little bit closer to that one. Let's do the same with this one, and let's see what happens. So I'm going to click on start simulation. And there we go. So if we're happy with our simulation, we're going to bake that. So let's reset the simulation, and in our MassFX tools on the side, we're going to go to the second tab, and we're going to click on bake all, and that's going to record keyframes for everything. There we go, it's done. And if I scrub through the timeline now, you'll see that we've got the animation baked in. Okay, next up we're going to create some lights. So let's just go to the lights and select V-Ray, V-Ray light, and then just drag out a very basic light in the middle of our scene. Let's move that up. Maybe let's move it a little bit higher. There we go. So let's apply some basic materials to these objects. So press M on your keyboard, and because we're done with the modeling, we can actually go ahead and delete this material. So just select it and hit delete on your keyboard, and let's create a new material for our bowling pins. So let's go V-Ray, V-Ray material, and let's just minimize that. Double click on the picture, double click on this one, and we're going to call this bowling pins. Okay, for the diffuse, we're going to select a white color. So click on that and make it white. And for reflection, we're going to add a little bit of reflection to this material. So click on the black and just pull that down slightly, maybe something like that. And we're also going to disable Fresnel reflections, so untick that. And we're going to set the reflection glossiness to around 0.9 to have a nice glossy finish. If you zoom in here, you can see how that looks like. Another thing that you can do in your material editor, you can right click on this and you can say show background in preview, and that will actually show a background and you can see the reflection on the material. Okay, next up we're going to select all our bowling pins. So just drag a little box around them. Make sure you're not selecting the floor as well. And we're going to right click on this little circle here and click on assign material to selection. Okay, for the floor, we're going to create a new material. So right click materials, V-Ray, V-Ray material, minimize it, double click the picture, and then double click this material. Let's give it a name. So I'm going to call it floor. And for this one, we're going to add a wooden material to the diffuse channel. So next to diffuse, click on the little box, and then we're going to look for wood. So scroll down and double click on the wood material, and then you'll have a very basic wood material. So let's double click this material again to make sure we're in this properties. Okay, next we're going to set the reflectivity of this wooden material. So click on reflect and let's just bring that down a little bit. Click on OK. Disable Fresnel reflections. And let's set the glossiness to 0.8. Okay, we're going to drag this one onto the floor. So drag that dot to the floor and release. Okay, lastly, we're going to create a material for our bowling ball. So we're going to right click materials, V-Ray, V-Ray material. And let's minimize that, double click again. And let's just call this one ball. And let's make this one red. So on the diffuse color, change that to red. Click on OK, and let's set the reflectivity. So let's just make it a slightly reflective. Click on OK. We're going to disable Fresnel reflections, and let's change the glossiness to around 0.95. That should be fine. And then you can select our bowling ball, right click on the dot, and click on assign material to selection. Okay, let's do a quick test render. So close that down, click on rendering, and then click on render. Okay, so as you can see, that's looking pretty nice. We've got some nice reflections on the ball, and we also have some nice reflections on the bowling pins. If we zoom in here a little bit and do a new render. So first of all, the shadow quality is not very good, and also the quality of these bowling pins, they very low poly. So let's see if we can do something about that. First of all, the shadows, what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom out, click on the light, go to the modify panel, and let's change the subdivisions under sampling. Let's change it to 32. And then we're going to go and select one of these bowling pins, and we're going to add a modifier to it. So on the modify tab, click down on the drop down box, scroll all the way down and look for turbo smooth. So once you're on turbo smooth, you can change this iterations number to 2, and that will add a lot of polygons to your object. So if I zoom in here, you can actually see that object is quite smooth. It's a lot smoother than the other objects. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy the turbo smooth from this one object and paste it on the other objects. So an easy way to do this is let's highlight this object, click on turbo smooth, then right click on it, click on copy. And then I'm going to click on the next bowling pin and then right click on one of these items in the modify panel, click on paste. And let's do the same with the next one. So right click there, paste. Next one, right click, paste. That one, right click, paste. That one, right click, paste. And if we scrub through this, we should still have the same animation. That's all good. And what we're going to do now, we're going to set this up for rendering. So let's just zoom out a bit and set your angle that you want. And then we're going to go to rendering, render setup. And we're going to select active time segment because we want to render all frames from 0 to 100. Make sure your output size is on HDTV 1920 by 1080, and we're going to scroll down to render output, click on files, and we're going to go to our folder. So you can either go to your desktop or anywhere. I'm going to go to my video projects, and then I'm going to create a folder called renders. I'm going to go into that folder and I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it bowling. And the save as type, I'm going to change to PNG because I want to render this as an image sequence. And let's click on setup to make sure that we've got an alpha channel. Yes, we do. That's ticked. Click on OK, then click save, and then click on render. So I hope you guys enjoyed this mini project and also the chapter on 3ds Max. And in the next chapter, we'll be looking at After Effects. Also remember to check out VideoFort.com, your #1 source for stock footage. I'll see you guys in the next video.